blast from the past because we're holding obviously today's meeting in the chamber. It's not something I would normally advocate. It's something we moved away from because actually the purpose of cabinet is a discussion amongst cabinet members making decision. And this format never really felt appropriate really to do that, but we're here today because obviously we've got some big issues on the agenda, a big issue on the agenda, and we were under the impression there may be additional visitors this afternoon, so if anybody turned up we've got enough room to accommodate them, and perhaps if they do we can help them find a place when they get here. So anyway, welcome everybody, welcome to anybody at home who's watching. I'm Peter Fox, I'm leader of the council, and as usual I'll just ask cabinet members to introduce themselves, plus other visiting members as well. Right.
Councillor Phil Murphy, Cabinet Member for Resources.
Hello, Councillor Penny Jones, Cabinet Member for Social Services, Health and Safeguarding.
Councillor Bob Greenland, Deputy Leader, responsible for enterprise and land use planning.
Richard John, Cabinet Member for Children, Young People and Mon Life.
Councillor Paul Jordan, Cabinet Member for Governance.
Councillor Jane Pratt, Cabinet Member for Infrastructure and Neighbourhood Services.
Opposition leaders?
Councillor Dee Petruni, Leader of the Labour Group.
Councillor Francis Taylor, Leader of the Independent Group.
Thank you, and we're also joined today, thankfully, by Councillor Tudor Thomas from the Children and Young People Select Committee, who's going to share some of the Select Committee's thoughts with us a little later. And we're also pleased to be joined by our Chairman, Councillor Sheila Woodhouse, and Councillor Maureen Powell and Councillor Louise Brown. Okay, and officers, if you take part in the debates later on, could you introduce yourselves as well for the purposes of those watching in? I have an apology from Sarah. Sarah Jones was on her way into the meeting, but she received a call which required her to go straight to the hospital as there's been an accident in the family. So we wish everything okay in that regard. Okay, so I'm going to take any further apologies. Okay. Right, are there any declarations of interest? Declarations of interest are from Cabinet or any other visiting elected member in here. If you have one, can you declare it now if you know it and fill in the appropriate pro forma? Or if you find one during the debates, would you please halt the proceedings and announce it whenever it comes to the fore? Are there any declarations? No? Okay. As I said, if you find one, just chirp up. Okay, that's going to take us on to item 3, and the first item of the agenda, probably the main item of today's agenda, the consultation report concerning the proposal to close Mountain House Special School. Councillor Richard John.
Thank you, Leader. Since 2017, Monmouthshire has been actively engaged in a wide-ranging review of how we provide facilities for our most vulnerable children with additional learning needs. In 2018, we consulted on changes to additional learning needs provision, which would have closed Mountain House Special School and opened a new facility on the Mountain House site, which would have acted as a hub for pupils with autistic spectrum disorder and social, emotional and behavioural difficulties, with responsibility over ALN provision in other parts of the county. This was rejected due to concerns over the management structure, governance arrangements, as well as the identified costs of transformation at £6.4 million. Mountain House is not in a fit-for-purpose condition at the moment, so required that investment. When it opened in the 1970s, it was designed to serve a population of 600,000 in Gwent. It now serves a local authority with a population of 100,000, and its narrow designation of social, emotional and behavioural difficulties accounts for just 13% of Monmouthshire's additional learning needs population, and accounts for 7% of Monmouthshire's statemented population of boys aged between 11 and 16 with SEBD. Monmouthshire's growing area of need in additional learning needs is autistic spectrum disorder, the population of which has increased by 50% in the past decade. Referrals to Mountain House from within county have remained fairly static in recent years, on average between 2 and 3 per year. Mountain House Special School is a school with residential facilities for boys between the ages of 11 and 16 with social, emotional and behavioural difficulties. The school has a capacity of 58 places, of which 42 are residential. There are currently 15 boys on roll, none of whom are residential. Of those 15, 6 reside in Monmouthshire, and we are corporate parents to a further 2. From August 2020, we anticipate there being 3 pupils residing in Monmouthshire and a further 2 placed here by neighbouring authorities. The low numbers of Monmouthshire pupils in the school means that the residual cost to the authority for our own pupils for the current academic year is over £131,000 per head. If the school were to remain open in the next academic year, this per pupil cost would rise to just under £263,000. In their responses to our consultation, neighbouring authorities have made it largely clear that they do not require this provision. The school had a critical ESTIN inspection in 2015. It went into a red category, which effectively deterred other authorities from placing pupils at the school. Since then, staff and governors have worked really hard to make significant progress in raising standards, and I pay tribute to their efforts. I'd also like to thank staff and governors for the dedication and hard work over so many years. We launched a consultation on the future of Mountain House in March 2019, and I also want to thank those who engaged in it. 88% of respondents were opposed to closure, and the full responses have been placed in the members' library. There were a number of concerns that were raised during the consultation, which are set out in 3.21. We've taken account of those concerns and responded accordingly. Firstly, there were concerns that it would not be appropriate to place pupils back in mainstream education. The authority has made it very clear that that would not be our intention. There were concerns that there might not be any alternative provision. The report makes clear that there would be bespoke placements at another special school or provision with our pupil referral service. Specifically for Year 10 pupils, we propose maintaining local provision with the PRS, but all decisions will be made in discussion with parents, with educational psychologists, and officers from our ALN team. The report sets out very clearly what our alternative provision would look like. Another concern was that the need for support with additional learning needs is increasing, and yes, it is, but primarily in the designation of autistic spectrum disorder, not social, emotional, and behavioural difficulties. The fourth argument made by respondents to the consultation was in line with the submission from Councillor Brown to the Children and Young People Select Committee yesterday, which was that the Council should extend provision at Mountain House for boys and girls and a full age range. This was very similar to what was consulted upon in 2018 and was discounted on the grounds of governance arrangements and cost. We recognise in the report that we will need to develop provision for 7 to 19-year-olds with a range of complex needs, including children and young people with neurodevelopmental conditions such as autistic spectrum disorder and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Mountain House's designation is one that no longer meets the needs of our ALN children. If we were to propose to set up a new school for 6 pupils, we would be told that that would not be appropriate. The building is no longer fit for purpose, and we could not transition it to another school, which caters for a group of pupils with very different complex needs. That's why today we're proposing to close the school and develop alternative provision, which does meet the needs of children with additional learning needs in Monmouthshire. Any decision to close a school is a difficult one. We've reflected on the considerable amount of evidence we've received both during and after the consultation. You might recall that we delayed our decision that had been scheduled for the 5th of June so we could consider additional evidence that hadn't been received during that formal period. We undertook a cabinet visit to the school to meet with the head teacher, senior staff and the chair of governors to discuss options. This report was debated in great length in Children and Young People Select Committee yesterday, and I recognise the strong views on both sides, represented by the 3 votes for and 3 against an alternative proposal. The school's scale and remit are no longer compatible with the needs of Monmouthshire. The 4 remaining Gwent authorities have all established or expanded their own provision in recent years, and governors at the school recognise that the status quo is not sustainable. The provision that is required in Monmouthshire needs to offer greater flexibility. The assertion that Mountain House Special School could simply change its designation and accommodate pupils with a diagnosis of ASD simply because staff have experience of supporting children with challenging behaviour is not valid, as the root causes arise from very different underlying conditions, one social and the other neurodevelopmental, thereby requiring greater levels of training, experience and expertise. We have a duty to provide support and an education to all our pupils. The continued provision at Mountain House Special School is too limited to support the needs of the broad spectrum of Monmouthshire's learners with additional learning needs. While the costs associated with renewing Mountain House Special School are currently prohibitive, and we have already made our priorities for 21st century schools clear, and we do not wish to depart from our plans for new schools in Abergavenny and in Chepstow. It's for those reasons that I recommend this report to Cabinet.
Okay, thank you, Richard. As you alluded to, it is never easy when a council has to preside over these sorts of things, but there is a responsibility on councils and those of us who have to oversee business to challenge and look and chew over these really difficult decisions at times, and it's our responsibility to do that in the interest of the young people in this case there and the future generations that are to follow. And my past experience in dealing with many school closures or school reorganisation has shown me many times that people are extremely passionate, quite rightly so, especially parents and stakeholders, and have always made passionate cases whilst schools should remain. And it is their job to do that, and it's quite right and proper that they do make those points very, very clear. But as I said, it's important that we, as elected members, have to preside then over the information we're presented with. I really welcomed the Children and Young People's debate yesterday. I spent a couple of hours actually listening to every word and every part of the debate and everything everybody said. So it really helped me in understanding more deeply how some members feel the report we have is either lacking or how there may be other options coming forward. And I'm going to, in a moment, perhaps before we discuss too much further, I'm going to invite Tudor Thomas, who is the chair of the committee, who has asked if he can present some of the thinking of the select committee and at least the option which was, I think I absolutely agree with your stance in bringing that option here today, and for you to use your casting vote in doing that. So, because it's right and proper, we have an opportunity to discuss all options and all thought processes as they've taken place. And so I thank you for bringing it along, and I do thank all members who took part in that debate, especially Councillor Louise Brown, who passionately has made a very, very strong case for an alternative model, not dissimilar to what we looked at last year. So perhaps before we get into a deeper debate, it'd be right and proper we have all of those perspectives on the table. So if it's okay with you, Tudor, can I invite you to come in at this stage?
Thank you, Chair. Basically, as you know, a very wide-ranging discussion yesterday, and the conclusion at the end, and it obviously was quite a closely contested decision, and I had to use my casting vote. I had voted in favour of a third option, and the third option is to change the type of provision offered at Mountain House Special School as a local authority school to meet the requirements of the ever-growing ALN need and for this change to be effected on a gradual basis. I used my casting vote to put it forward as well, even if I'd voted against it, because I felt it was right and proper that that discussion should take place. I've listened to a wide range of views, and I appreciate emotions run high when you're talking about the school, and particularly you're talking about the school of the most vulnerable pupils. They are not in mainstream, and that has had a bearing on my thoughts about it. I've listened frequently to our senior officer, Will McLean, and he has really gone through it in some detail, and to be fair, has been open and responsive in terms of the discussion. But emotion aside, I think as an authority, we've got to make the best decision for all youngsters, including those at Mountain House, and an increasing number of children who have particular needs, and also obviously every other child in the authority. And I certainly do not believe in making decisions that are not, in a sense, value for money. And you can't make decisions on an emotional basis. I've tried to listen to people. I've certainly encouraged the debate yesterday, and it was passionate for people who watched it. And I'm glad that it was, because it is an incredibly important decision. And once we've taken it, we can't go back on it. And personally, I do think it is not the right decision. The feeling, obviously now, is that closure on the current site is inevitable because of the very close range, 11 to 16. It's only boys, it's only SEBD. In reality, and I'm not blaming anybody here, but some changes should have been made a while ago. I gave the analogy the other day, and I still stick to it. If I was going to open a restaurant in Abergavenny tomorrow, I wouldn't say, well, we're only selling Vindaloo and you've got to be 18 to 20 to be able to access it. I don't think it would survive. And to be fair to the staff, they've almost been set up to fail. Because I looked at the report, the head said they could have taken, over the last 3 years, something like 37 additional youngsters, pupils, if the ruling that the child had to be statemented before they could go there. So, plus the fact that there's been so much discussion about the future and the uncertainty of the school, both parents and local authorities have become nervous about sending children there because they want to see children going there to have stability for the rest of their education. And I do feel, yes, closure is inevitable. I've been to the site. I've visited the school now on 2 or 3 occasions. I've spent quite a bit of time there with the leader, Councillor Dimitri Bartru, and got a feel for it. And obviously the building is tired and it needs refurbishment, or it needs re-establishing elsewhere. And the third proposal that I've put forward is that there is a need for a 4 to 19 provision for MCC children, co-educational, covering a broad range of special needs, and also offering intensive therapy for some pupils to prevent those pupils being excluded from school. We do have, as an authority, quite a high exclusion rate, and much of that is linked to behaviour, and sometimes behaviour which is very, very challenging. I've also listened to teachers, and you put yourself in the place of a teacher with a class of 30 youngsters on a sweaty, hot Friday afternoon, and you've got a child there with very challenging behaviour, and you've got 29 other children, and some of those might be challenging in their different ways, plus the fact you've got the head and the governing body bearing over you saying, we want results. We want to see Key Stage 4 GCSE results improve or whatever level they're at. Teachers are in a very difficult position. And I think without a broad spectrum school providing for both primary and secondary schools, I think we're heading for disaster. The consultation, yes, it was very detailed, but it was like going up a closed alley. You had 2 options: close or maintain it at something like £230,000 per pupil. It's not really an option, in my opinion. We haven't looked more broadly at what could be done. And that was a feeling of many people at CYP yesterday. And to be fair, some people at CYP obviously believe that it should close. And I can't deny that. But speaking, to the head, she's got extra pupils coming in. There's one lad come in now who's year 6. He's transitioned early because he's almost unmanageable in a mainstream primary school. Both she and her staff have been under extreme pressure because of this one boy. And I'm not blaming him. It's not his fault. It's the condition that he has. I accept that it's got to close. It's been so limited. The site is not particularly well maintained. And in reality, it's quite far from the community. And I think of, if you look at Trinity Fields in Caerphilly, on Caerphilly Mountain, that is a school based on a hub and spoke system where you've got, yes, specialist teaching there, but you've also got a lot of support going out to schools within the communities, and the school is part of the community. And I think that is very, very important. I strongly believe, and I think many members who obviously responded to the consultation and who were in CYP yesterday, there is a special need for a special school in MCC, both as a school and as a resource. There might be a case to reincarnate Mountain House on a new site, and I don't think the head of the staff are opposed to that. Obviously offering the broad range. I look at every other LEA in EAS, and I've been speaking to them now since I've been chair of children and young people. We will be the only authority in South East Wales without specialist provision. And I think that is a major weakness in our sort of repertoire of helping those children. And then I hop to our mission statement that pops up and it says, give every child the best start in life. And I think for some children who've got these particular special needs now, they're not going to have a particularly good start in life. The cost of sending children, are we going to send to a private provision, Talica, part of the Priory Group, which hasn't got the best reputation in terms of care for people, is 65,000. We don't know what level those people are trained to. They don't come under Estyn inspection. The Headlands is from a sort of a charitable group. That's going to charge £45,000 per pupil. But also, I think for the children who are going to be sent on, and we might make sort of the right sorts of noises. Yes, we want the best for them and so on. But I looked on the AA route the other day. To go to Headlands, it's 58 minutes and 38 miles in average traffic conditions. At peak times, it's going to be longer, and you're going to have very challenging pupils there, either in a minibus or a car, with an escort who's paid a minimum wage and who's very, very lightly trained. They're not specialists in coping with children with particular needs. Now, if you've been stuck on the M4, as I have in the past, you probably sit back, put Radio 2 on and go with it. Those children are not going to do the same. And I seriously, I do worry about that. My own sort of gut feeling is we need this school and resource centre. And we need it long term. And if we don't do it, we're not only failing special needs children, the ALN children, we're also failing children in mainstream schools. I've spoken to a lot of teachers who said, I'm getting to a point I can't cope now because I've got very challenging children in my class. And they're possibly hitting other children, and the parents of the other children are then complaining to me. I'll come to the conclusion. What really convinced me more than anything, and that report, it takes some reading. It's 70-odd pages. But the two things that really stuck out for me, one was the Estyn response, which said it was not confident about the future proposals. And it actually says, Estyn's view is that there is a lack of clarity as to whether the proposals are likely to at least maintain the standard of education provision in the area. They're not convinced. Now, Estyn, I would take their judgment. It's not Joe Bloggs on the street. They are experts. And the very final bit, and that really got to me, was looking at the responses of the children and the parents, and where one parent said, he said, my son was suicidal before attending Mountain House. Now he's settled and he's happy, and not suicidal, he really doesn't want to move to another school or another provision. So I really think we need to think of that third option.
Thank you, Tudor. Obviously, you've got your own personal views and the select committee here to deliver the select committee perspective of the third option, which thank you for that. And actually, in your opening remarks, you made it very clear that you recognise the school needed to close, and you also, and I think we all agree, and the report agrees, that we need to develop a more specialist provision in due course to align to all of the needs which have been identified, and that's actually highlighted in 3.41 very clearly. But there is a lot of us who want to contribute to a wider debate around this. I'm going to, whilst some of us watched the report yesterday, and I have to say that I was thankful for the responses provided by Will McLean to the Select Committee and other officers, because it helped give the clarity to some of those points you raised. And I think it would be worthwhile, especially for those people who didn't get to see the recording or haven't as yet, to let Will McLean come in and perhaps just talk to some of those key points again, so we have some clarity. Because as I understand it, and I don't think you disagree in Tudor, the position we have at the moment is not necessarily sustainable, and certainly there's no way you can actually just morph what is there now into some other wider reaching provision. That can't happen. There has to be a process that has to be gone through before one thing can be wound up and a new thing created at some point. So I'm going to, at this point, perhaps bring Will in to talk to some of those perhaps points you've reiterated there, and give us any further information that he feels fit. Will?
Thank you, Leader. Good afternoon. Will McLean, a Chief Officer for Children and Young People. Thank you for the opportunity just to respond to those comments raised by Councillor Thomas. And we did have a very thorough debate yesterday at the Select Committee, and I'm happy to reiterate some of the positions we illustrated at that time. With regards to your first comment, Councillor Thomas, in terms of the school being set up to fail and the number of children who actually access the school following referral, the admissions process for Mountain House is a shared admissions process between the local authority and the school. So both parties discuss who is eligible, who is suitable and appropriate to attend the school. That process is consensus-led, and my colleagues who attend that on my behalf and on behalf of the local authority, very clear to state the fact that actually those positions are arrived at in a very consensual way, looking for what is the best need, the best provision for those children. So a notion that we have in some way kind of stopped children attending the school in a way to run it down, I would personally refute that position. The second point is that you require a statement to attend Mountain House Special School because it is a special school. And that's a really important point in terms of how you gain access to those schools. And of course, at the moment, we have statements, and they are a significant endeavour of professionals, of educational psychologists, members of the health community as well, arrive at a position whereby they determine what the needs are of those children, and they then stipulate the school that those children should attend. Your second point with regards to exclusion rates, and this will be something that comes in front of Select Committee in this coming term, no doubt. Our exclusion rates in secondary are too high, but to put those two things together, exclusion rates and support for the most needy children who have a diagnosis of SEBD, is actually to conflate two different issues that confront us within school at the moment. It's not simply the case that increased exclusions warrant increased specialist provision. Increased exclusions warrant us having a different and a more sustained graduated response to behaviour in the classroom. And that's something that we're looking to support and invest further in across all of our school settings. I agree as well with the committee yesterday that there is a need for a broader based provision in Monmouthshire. We know the pressure that we're experiencing currently because of the needs of children with autistic spectrum disorder and attention deficit disorder. They are critical to how we meet the needs for our pupils going forwards. And you can see from the graph, which is on page 3, paragraph 310, the way that particular group of our population with additional learning needs has grown over the past period. That links on to the Trinity Fields point, and I think Councillor John rightly recognised that that Mountain House is a school that is in Monmouthshire almost by a fluke of geography, in a sense. It was part of a provision that was brought up for Gwent County Council, and it served the needs of a very, very significant authority at that point in time. But it has always served that same very narrow designation of social, emotional, behavioural difficulties. The schools which are cited as being good examples of that broad-based provision have always had that broad base. So Trinity Fields, Crown Bridge, etc., are able to provide for a much broader range of youngsters already before they develop into a hub-and-spoke model. I think with regards to your comments around the EAS and provision that exists elsewhere in Gwent, to say that we don't have specialist provision in the local authority is simply untrue, I'm afraid. We have 3 special needs resources bases in our primary settings. 2 are established at the moment in Pembroke and Overmono. The third one, in light of the ALN review, is currently going through significant revision to become an assessment centre, which will really help us with these very young children who are presenting with significantly challenging behaviour and neurodevelopmental challenges, and that's in Derry View in Abergavenny. Across the 2 new secondary schools we have built capacity for 110 places for a range of complex needs. So there is capacity within Monmouthshire for specialist provision. It's led very well by expert practitioners who support that population. I think within any kind of model where there is an escalating need, what we're recognising here is that the pinnacle of need sometimes requires us to place children out of county. So for our children who've got profound and multiple learning difficulties, we often have to place into Hearts of the Forest, to Pennacombe or to Crown Bridge, and that allows us to do that. But for a significant number, 150 places, we have in-county provision in special needs resources basis. With regard to the Priory, all special schools, all independent special schools are subject to inspection frameworks, and we do have a very good awareness of the schools that we place our children into, because for a significant period of time we've had to place all of our girls to those schools because we haven't been able to place them to Mountain House. So it's not as though these are new schools that we are unaware of or unaware of their practice. We are very aware of the type of practice that exists in those schools, the different approaches that they have, and how successful they are for the children we've placed them there. With regard to the distance, and yes, absolutely, it is Penarth is a long way for some of our learners, but I would just point out as well that Chepstow is quite a distance from Abergavenny as well. I think you cited 58 minutes. I think the same route planner gives us 45 minutes from Abergavenny to Pull and Merrick site. Abergavenny is currently the area which draws most significantly into Mountain House, with 4 of our current pupils coming from Abergavenny. We're a large rural authority. The likelihood of travel will exist. I know it's been very clearly articulated that we want our children to remain in our local authority, and I think my point is to prove not that Penarth isn't a long way away, but simply that the placing of any special needs resource is always going to require travel for some children, given the nature of our county. And finally, just to come to the comments you made around the Estin piece. The first one around, for me, is largely around the timing. In our previous report, where we sought permission to consult, at that moment in time, our question to Cabinet was, do you give us permission to consult about the future of the school? I believe in this paper, we do give more than sufficient consideration as to how we will support those learners in the future. I believe that we've addressed Estin's concerns with that regard. We set out quite clearly how we would provide for children in Key Stage 4. That would be a bespoke provision for those children, and clearly for those children in Key Stage 3 who will have a prolonged period of school beyond a potential closure date of the 31st of August, we talk around placing those in suitable equivalent schools in the future. It is always, and as Councillor John has already made clear, these are never decisions that we make lightly. They're not recommendations that we draw together lightly, but they are decisions that we have to make. We recognise entirely that they have an impact on the children within the school, and we have spoken to the children about how they feel about it, and we've seen them respond on both occasions, to specific aspects. So in the first consultation, when we talked about girls going to the school, the boys weren't very positive about girls going to the school. So there are different ways in which they respond, but clearly we will do all we can now in the next period of time to ensure that the transition, should Cabinet make this decision this afternoon, that the transition is as positive a transition for those. I know that's what the leadership of the school are committed to. I think it's also worth noting that in the initial request to Cabinet for the right to go and consult on the future of the school, we put an indicative closure date of the 31st of December of this year. I think Cabinet absolutely recognised the initial feedback that we'd had around that timing and extended that to the 31st of August. And that gives us this whole academic year to plan properly and effectively for those children's futures beyond the 31st of August 2020. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Will, for going over that. That was really useful. There are a couple of things which jump out to me, which, and I'm sure others will recognise as well. I'm glad you touched on girls, because the focus of this provision has been for boys, and we're talking, and we're anxious, quite rightly anxious, about our boys and any children in school, of what provision will be put in place for them going forward. And perhaps we can just spend a couple of minutes on that in a minute to explain out what about the bespoke packages. However, I'm acutely conscious, you just pointed out, that our young girls, for years and years, and in all of my time, over 22 years in this authority, girls have never been at Mountain House School. They may have been many, many years prior to that in the early part, but certainly haven't been since I've been anywhere near this council. And girls, and provision for girls has obviously been suitable, and delivered the quality of education we would expect to them over the years. So in the light of knowing that, I'm comfortable personally that we can offer the same bespoke provision to address the specific needs of our young boys and males who are in our system. But I'm sure people watching in and people who read the press would want reassurance that the young people in our care are going to have the very best provision to meet their needs if the school, or when the school finally closes. And I think the other thing I personally want to be reassured about is that the authorities who are responsible for other children who access our school at the moment are equally prepared and on the journey of making sure that bespoke packages are made for the children in their care, because we have a duty of care to all of those boys in our school as it is at the moment, if they come from South Gloucestershire, Bristol, Avon, wherever. And I want reassurance that all children in that school will be getting the quality of education we would expect for our own children if they were in such a case. So I wouldn't mind just having some reassurance on that. I think the distance issue is just one of those things within any special provision. I mean, at the moment there are children who are driving many tens of miles to attend Mountain House from many other authorities, perhaps not from our own authority. And we see many children in Monmouthshire actually electing to do that when they access Welsh medium education or denominational education, which might be the other side of the counties. It's just one of those things when you live in a large rural authority. The geography requires further transport, but we obviously want to minimise that as best we can. So there's just a couple of points there which might be useful, and I'm going to open it up to other colleagues. Please, Will.
Thank you, Leader. Of course, the continued good standard of education for the pupils who would be affected by this closure is absolutely fundamental. As at the beginning of the next academic year or the close of the current academic year, there would be 6 children in Key Stage 3 and 3 in Key Stage 4. Our proposal for those children in Key Stage 4 would be that we would create bespoke curriculum offers for those children that would be made up of a range of different offers, including work experience, college placements, as well as school-based support. We indicate in the paper that that would also be supported by pupil engagement officers, teaching assistants and a teacher to make sure that they received a good level of education as they concluded their time in education, in statutory education. For the 6 children who are in Key Stage 3, I think we've been clear in the paper that they will be placed in a different setting, in a different provision. So they won't have bespoke curriculum design. They will be placed in another one of the schools in South Wales that provides the education to meet their needs. So absolutely commit to meeting their needs in the future. Yeah, of course. So we have an ongoing relationship. There are 2 parts to this, I guess, and 2 levels of activity. The first is through the normal annual review process for children with a statement of additional learning needs, and we'll be very clear during that how we do that reviewing process. But clearly these are now exceptional circumstances if Cabinet agree this today. And in light of that, there is likely to be a heightened and more intensive piece of work with all partners to make sure that those children have the right packages of care for the future.
Thanks. I thought it was important to just clarify that for people who may not have read the report but who may be looking in and sharing some concerns. Okay, colleagues, Richard, you've heard quite a lot as well, and I'm sure you want to perhaps come back, perhaps as Cabinet member, and then I'll open up to everybody else. Yeah, right. Bring Richard in first.
Yeah, I think Councillor Thomas made some really important points there that that explain the decision-making process that we've been through. That the school isn't in an ideal location. The building is not fit for purpose. The status quo is not sustainable. The provision is too narrow for our needs, and it was designed for a completely different age and a different authority. But I think there are several stages to this debate, and this is about whether this school is fit for purpose and whether it meets the needs today. And I think we have a clear answer to that in this report. But then there's a whole other debate about how we continue long term into the future to provide for every young person with additional learning needs in our county. And we've recognised very clearly in the report that there is a need for some bespoke provision in county, and we'll work towards that. But this is, I think, a very clear decision to make today.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Whilst I, first of all, recognise that there are economic arguments in this, I actually think that's very secondary. I come to this, and when I am going to vote, my decision will be made on what is best for the children, what is best for the children there at the moment, and what is best for the children as we move forward. I'm grateful for the points that Councillor Thomas has brought from yesterday's meeting, and particularly grateful for the reassurances that we've had from Will McLean to many of the points that have been made by him. My real concern was I accept that 3 or 4 pupils in a school is not it's not possible that you can go on with that many pupils. However, what is to happen to those pupils, and I was looking for assurances that there would be bespoke education available for those children that were still in that school, and I think we've received that. I also was looking in depth at the consultation responses, and in particular from Councillor Brown's very full consultation response and the points that she put forward. And what it seems to me is this, that in considering a provision, as is suggested, which will be all ALN pupils frankly, to me, doesn't seem as it will work. If you have got a small cohort of boys with very emotional, behavioural difficulties, how can you have a school where you also have, on the other side of the spectrum, children with autism spectrum disorders who are very, very different in their needs to these other pupils? How can you also have the pupils who are age 19 with difficulties, behavioural difficulties, along with 7-year-old pupils? And how can you have boys and girls as well in this new third way? I don't think it can possibly work. And I think that the only way forward is the way that we are, that is being proposed to us in this report. And with regret, no one likes us to see a school closing, but I think that it has outlived its purpose, and we can do better for the children with ALN needs right across the spectrums in the future than the current way that we are providing.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. And inevitably, although I've always been concerned about the educational needs of the children, you'd expect me to be looking at it from a financial point of view as well. For quite a number of years now, I've been looking at, with officers, the possibility of cutting down on external placements. We've very much been concerned about the amount of money that we're spending on external placements that perhaps could better be channeled towards mainstream education if we could find a satisfactory way of dealing with those children. It's not true to say that all provision has to be in Monmouthshire. It's up to Monmouthshire to make sure that we've made the necessary plans to ensure the best possible education within the needs of that child and what we can afford. And clearly, the costs associated with Mountain House at the moment, with a small number of pupils in it, is absolutely prohibitive given all the pressures we've got on the educational budget. So with the proviso that we must, under all circumstances, make sure that we've looked after the children involved in this, I can't see any alternative but to look to close the school, because I'm quite satisfied that we've done that review into alternative uses, and we've got an alternative provision that will actually do the job which is currently being done in Mountain House. So I've come to the conclusion that it should close for those reasons.
One of the things which I remember past Minister for Education, Jane Davison, shared with me when I was starting my strategic review of education in 2001. One of the things she said to all of us in those positions looking at schools was the needs of the learner overrides all others. And that was the direct quote that she said. It's stuck with me all the time, and that helped me through every decision I made which were difficult, and some of the decisions we made which were pleasurable as well, because of building new schools as well as closing some. And we always have that picture in my mind. Is the provision we're offering, is it most suitable? Is it sustainable? Is it in the best interest of the young person who we are trying to serve? And if it isn't, we have to do something about it, even though there may be members in communities or other people who believe the status quo should continue because the thought of change is worrying. And I understand those fears, but sometimes you do need to take those very difficult decisions. From what I heard through the whole debate yesterday, through Select Committee, and what I've heard today from Tudor, through likes of Martin yesterday in his meeting, there doesn't seem to be much between us, that we regret that we are in a position where this school has to close because it has to close before you can be anything else. You cannot have something which becomes a significant change to a provision. You cannot put that in place until something is finished, closed, and then reconsulted on being re-established somewhere. And so I heard yourself, Tudor, say that, sadly, you feel there's no alternative but to close. If we believe that the status quo isn't sustainable, isn't in the best interests of children, surely there is only one option. And what I'm pleased about is in the report, whilst it addresses all the immediate needs, it highlights very clearly in 3.41 that wider need to look at our future provision in a specialist provision within the county is something which needs to be developed, and further work will be done around that. And even references in 341 the school in 342, it starts, the school would provide a specialist environment. So we're not miles away. So what Louise brought to the meeting yesterday, wanting a more inclusive and a provision which could address many things, is what we're alluding to here. But we're also, through this paper, dealing with the situation we have right at this moment, which isn't sustainable and isn't in the interest of those few learners there. That brings me on to the underlying concern which some people might have about what about the place. The place is immaterial to me, it's about the learner. But the place, so the place is there. So some concerns, what will happen with that? I don't know. It might be part of that deeper, longer discussion which we're going to have relating to 3.41. It may be that that is some part of the alternative in the future. It may be not. It may be that it's situated in somewhere far more accessible, far better, far more appropriate. I don't know. But the reality is that's a decision we need to come to and talk about in the round as we develop the thinking around 3.41. But the issue for me as a Cabinet is very clear today. It's about how we consider and deliberate on the issues and the facts and everything which presented before us. And I have not heard anything, and I listened very carefully. Indeed, Cabinet this morning, again, listened to the whole of the Select Committee meeting and the debates put by every individual, and I have not, and the rebuttals or responses I heard from all of the officers, and I have no problem in supporting the recommendation that is before us, providing that we had the reassurances about the education provision for those children who would be affected or displaced. I'm confident, and what I've heard gives me the confidence to be able to make the decision we have. And then, I know there's a consultation process goes on around that, but then I look forward to that deeper conversation about 3.41, the future, and the future generations and the future children we need to serve. Because, as I said at the beginning, our role is to look not just at this moment in time, it's about future generations and the children coming on behind, our grandchildren and great-grandchildren. We are obliged to make a provision which is sustainable for that future generations. And so sometimes I know this will be a political platform, I can almost see it in building but sometimes these things are too big for politics. This is about the children. And so I'm happy with what we've got before us. Cabinet members, is there any other Cabinet member which comes in? I know Dimitri's got a question he wants to ask, and I will allow him to ask that. No? Dimitri, would you like to ask a question?
First question.
Thank you, Leader. I think I commented on this in my earlier comments. For me, in terms of how we put the reporting together, was in terms of the time. So we've now got this extended period of time of the next academic year to work through not only the annual review process as per the statementing, but in a much deeper way to find those appropriate solutions for those children. I think that's absolutely the right thing. It's entirely what we would have said we would do. I don't think there's been any change in that position. I think that's the right thing to do for those children.
Thank you. So it was just timing, so we won't address Eston's concern. How does the proposed closure fit with the policy of reducing out-of-county transport?
Clearly, these are some of our most vulnerable learners that we have. There are a small number of Monmouthshire pupils within the current schools cohort. Our reduction in out-of-county transport is to make sure that the investments that we make in primary and secondary schools are available to Monmouthshire pupils. I think if we were to set that as a concrete policy that resisted the transport of children to the best provision for them, that would be a very odd thing to do. Given the nature of South Wales, given the nature and the dispersal of specialist provision, there is always going to be the case that you will have to transport some children out of county to meet those needs.
Okay, that was contrary to everything we've been told for the last year about bringing stuff in-house, but okay. Last question, and the reason why I asked this question is because of Eston again, which was, I think the leader talked about this as well, was why were only 2 proposals considered in the consultation? And why I ask that, and this is really important, is Eston say, it is not clear enough as to why the proposer cannot consider other available options while the school remains open. And that has been discounted here, that we have to close it first somehow before we can consider the future. But even Eston recognise and don't understand why we can't consider options while it's open.
I guess this is the point at which some of the other considerations are significant considerations. So the financial considerations, the financials around the economy of the provision, the nature of it, being a school, which I think for any analysis, to have a school which has got capacity for 58 pupils with 31 members of staff there, but as of September next year to have only 9 or 10 pupils is not represent a good environment for those pupils. That is not appropriate. So what we're doing is recognising that in order to actually progress and build on and develop the provision that everybody has recognised that the authority will have to have in the future, at the moment, resolving the issues around Mountain House is the right thing to do to allow us to do that in the future. The notion that was brought up yesterday in the Select Committee that in some way Mountain House Special School could morph into a new school in the future, frankly, within the organisation codes, within best practice, within the time frames, is simply not possible. We would have to, given the scale of change that has been proposed, to go to full age range, to go to girls and boys, and a much broader set of needs, the school would have to close and reopen. That's exactly what we consulted upon last year. I think that's a matter that's been overlooked in some of the analysis. Doing this allows us to make sure that we are now designing an appropriate and fit provision for the future of our children within Monmouthshire, and that's critical. The other thing, just to point out, in Eston's response, they are quite clear that the proposer has clearly set out the rationale for the closure. They're not disputing that in any way. They do ask that one question. They asked that question about the school remaining open, and I've just said, at the moment, it's continuing to be a significant challenge for the authority. It's not money, and at one point have I ever said it's money. There continue to be challenges around the financial and the economic aspects of the school, and in terms of the efficacy of running a school with such a small number of pupils in it, with such a significant capacity within the school.
And thanks, Will. As I said, this should not be a political football. This is something where it's really serious, and it's about us planning ahead and thinking of those young people, and that's what I think we are doing as a responsible authority. But as I said, I can't see how we're too far apart, because I'm not sure how you believe, or how people are believing, that the third option differs so much from what possibly could come about through 3.41. 3.41 is actually is looking for us to develop exactly what you're asking for in your third option. Eston is an inspectorate. It's an inspectorate. When I've met with Estin on many times, and I have huge respect for them, and we've been in some difficult situations, if you ask Estin for some advice on how to take something forward, you very struggle to get advice from Estin. Estin are extremely important consultee, and you know, we will always have an important dialogue with them. I think Will has explained the situation very clearly. These sorts of decisions are not taken lightly. There's a huge amount of work, and I think to sum up, I just want to thank everybody who's taken part in the consultation, those who've passionately made cases for retaining it or retaining the building within the community, the staff, the unions, our officers that have conducted so much of the work around that, those members who have been involved, and not many members have been involved in this, but I'm pleased that the Select Committee focused so hard yesterday on it. I was pleased that the roundedness of the debate yesterday. I thought Martin's contribution on behalf of the Labour group was extremely strong, and I hope he was satisfied with the reassurances he sought and Will gave. And so I think we've given this a fair challenge. So I'm going to now take us to the recommendations, and they are well, the recommendation is on. Get back there in a second. So the recommendation is in 2.1. There's no final cabinet members. Rich, did you want to sum up anything? Did you? No. Sorry, I should have done that.
Simply to thank the one opposition councillor who did engage in the consultation. I think it's important that as many people as possible do contribute. And about this third option that was discussed in great detail yesterday in Children and Young People, I almost feel like in a way the consultation's been approached from a different point of view, where our only consideration has been, is this the most appropriate provision for those children in our county? And I almost feel that for some members they've approached the consultation from the point of view, well, what can we do to make this school viable? How can we change the designation or somehow increase the number of pupils to make it sustainable? The building isn't our primary concern. It's what's the most appropriate provision for those pupils. And I would say to the members who did support that third option that was put forward yesterday, even if we had taken that path and say we had approved the proposal in the consultation last year, the school would still have closed. We would have had to close the school and then reopen it as something else. So even if everything you wanted to happen happened, we would still end up closing that school and setting up some alternative provision. So I think this is the right decision. We've got because we've extended that period now until the end of the academic year, we've got further time to consider the absolute best bespoke provision for those pupils, and I think this is the right decision to take.
Thank you, Rich, and thanks for your work in this. It's not an easy thing to carry forward. Right, so I'm going to move us to the recommendations in 2. The recommendation 2.1 to agree to publish notices for the closure of Mountain House Special School, and in 2.2 that Cabinet agrees the use of Investor Save reserve funding to support the Extended Pupil Referral Service, the PRS, for the remainder of this financial year. This will be repaid in the next 2 financial years. All in favour of those recommendations? That's unanimous. Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to take us on to the next item then, and that is the Revenue Medium-Term Financial Plan. Phil Murphy.
Yes, thank you, Leader. And the purpose of this report is to highlight the context within which the medium-term financial plan will be developed through from 2021 to 23-24. There's a lot of assumptions in there always are, and we're asked to agree the assumptions used to update the MTFP to get an early indication of the level of budget savings that we need to find. And I'll come on to the current forecasts of the amount we need to find in a minute. There's also the process and timetable for developing the MTFP and specific budgets for 2021. So the recommendation is that the budget assumptions which are outlined in paragraphs 3.6 to 3.13 are agreed and updated during the budget process should better information become available. And of course we're still waiting to hear what is likely to come from Cardiff Bay, although judging by the report that came out yesterday relating to the Minister's statement, it looks very much as if they're going to be concentrating on the NHS again, and very little money is likely to come to local authorities, but we'll wait and see what the outcome of the lobbying in that regard turns up. And the budget process, there's a timetable outlined in 3.26 there, and we're looking to adopt that. So members will know that the budget and the medium-term financial planning process has had a consistent theme over recent years, and the process of being adopted that has been adopted has sought to maintain a medium-term view on the financial position and to try and plan the savings targets over that 4-year period. In 1819, the outturn position and subsequent period 1 for 1920 monitoring reports has provided an indication of a significant tightening of our financial position, and we're looking at a potential 2.4 million overspend during that period. And whilst the Council is taking recovery action and bearing down on non-essential expenditure, the pressures will clearly have a bearing on the budget for 2021. Indications are that this period of financial restraint in public sector is set to continue for some time to come. And as I said just now about the Minister's statement, that seems to be more and more likely. There has been an announcement from Westminster about the potential for spending reviews. The Welsh Block Grant is expected to grow by some 600 million, but which is a 2.3% real-term interest increase. But as I say, most of that seems to be going to the NHS rather than to local authorities on what is indicated at the moment. If you have a look at the forecasts, you'll see that we're indicating that over the next 4 years, we're likely to have to find some £21 million in addition to the savings that we've already made. And that's clearly going to be a very big ask. We're looking at the pay award, we're looking at the council tax increases, we're looking at the assumptions, we're looking to adopt an improved settlement position, hoping that the steady decline from 1.8% will come to maybe 1%, but we'll see. There has been a flaw in the past which has helped us out. We're looking at the automatic staff vacancy factor. We're looking at the unidentified pressures and considering doubling that provision to try and get some better idea about where we are. Looking at the Band B aspiration with regards to unsupported borrowing costs, and of course the pressures that we're aware of in the passenger transport unit. So all of this taken into account, and there's a lot more detail in this report, but it shows in 3.9 that we are looking at some 21 million over that 4-year period, which is going to take some handling, I have to say. So that's it in a nutshell, Leader. There's a lot more in this report, but that's principally what it's designed to do.
Thank you, Phil. Obviously, we have this every year, but I think it's a stark reminder of the massive pressure we've got. I did read a statement prepared by the Finance Minister yesterday, which I couldn't quite believe that it was just a doom and gloom negative story about finances. And whilst, yes, things aren't good, the fact that £600 million additionality of unhypothecated consequential flowing through the M4 corridor to Wales government to do as they wish seemed like a pretty good a good step forward of 2.3, and then I read it, and it's like almost, well, don't hold your breath, local government. You know, we're going to be, and so I will be working, believe me, along with other leaders of all political persuasions, be making a strong case for a fair lump of that money to come to local government to address some of the shortfall that we've had to absorb because of their policies over the last few years. Indeed, the First Minister has asked to have a meeting with the local government minister and leaders of the WLJ groups in the near future. I think that's set for later in October, but we will be meeting in various guises through the WLJ to make our case heard. I know health is very deserved and it needs support constantly, but we are at a place where our preventative services are getting undermined so much that they are creating additional pressure in the health services, a self-fulfilling prophecy that Wales government continued to align to, and we need to reverse that. At the same time, as there's a group of authorities who still have a great concern around around Wales, where we still believe the distribution of whatever monies is available isn't fairly dispersed, and I will be lobbying hard to make sure that is addressed going forward, because there's an inequality and unlevel playing field across Wales in many areas, certainly within public service. There is an unlevel playing field, and lots of things need to be addressed. So, colleagues, anybody want to add to Phil's report? Yep. No? Dimitri, you've got a question on housing council tax?
On the FTP, have we considered any increase in council tax receipts from new homes as part of our thinking?
Always.
Doesn't seem to be in there.
It's always in the budget consultations. The actual figure is always stated during the budget report. It doesn't have to be there. We always do it.
So we can always assume that that is catered for in all of our figures.
Yeah, it's part of the calculations. I know Peter would like to come in on that, but it's always there.
Yes, just to clarify, we always look to undertake an assessment of the tax base, as is required for Welsh Government, but and to meet their deadlines, but even beyond that as well. And what with a special cabinet meeting being scheduled for the 18th of December, we will look to assess that position as close as possible to that. And obviously, as Councillor Murphy has highlighted, just to aid just to ensure that the information that goes out in consultation is as timely as possible and as up to date.
Okay, thanks very much, Pete. Okay, I'm going to take us to the recommendation there then, and the recommendations are that 2.1, that the budget assumptions outlined in paragraphs 3.6 to 3.13 in the report are agreed and updated during the budget process should better information become available, and 2.2, that the budget process and timetable as outlined in paragraph 3.2.6 is adopted, including member budget scrutiny and consultation conducted through all member seminars, member and officer working groups, community engagement, select and consultation meetings, certainly for the business rate purposes. All in favour of those? Thank you very much. Can I bring us to the last report of the day, and that's VAT management arrangements. Phil again.
Yes, thank you, Leader. And this report talks about determining the impact that any planned investment of the authority's leisure facilities will have when combined with a decision for the council to adopt the ELIN VAT rule on the overall right to recover VAT on all council costs. What that's about is that for donkey's years there's been a great debate regarding the VAT on educational and sporting activities. It's been going on for donkey's years, and HMRC have always adopted the stance that it was VATable. And as a result, part of our the cost to the public in paying subscriptions to use our facilities, we've been paying over the 20% VAT included in that figure. Ealing Council took that to the European Court of Justice, and it was held that that shouldn't happen. And HMRC have have accepted that. So what the recommendation here is to submit retrospective claims in respect of the Ealing VAT ruling, and with us that's just over 2 million that we can claim as a one-off. That will help with the current budget, and if it takes a long time to come, the next one. But it will certainly give us a one-off benefit in adopting that rule and making the retrospective claim. And the Council's processes and claims are amended to allow the Ealing ruling to be adopted from the 1st of November 2019. And that appraisal of the outsourcing of Caldecott leisure investment, because that's the next one to be looked at, to a third party be undertaken. And to closely monitor the VAT costs, especially costs spent in VAT-exempt areas, and where necessary to identify and advise on options looking using a look-forward approach. Because we've got some 7 years that we have to look. There's specific rules, de minimis rules they're called, that restrict where you are. And if you break those de minimis rules, then you can be potentially penalised in that you have additional VAT costs that you would have avoided. So we have to stay within the calculations of the 5% threshold and the rules associated with partial exemption, although the likelihood is that that might change as a result of this ruling. So it gives us the opportunity for the authority to submit that retrospective claim and to increase accordingly the amount of income to the Mon Life because of the fact that we don't have to pay that 20% over. We do have to safeguard our continuing ability to recover all of that we incur in our costs, particularly, as I say, with regards to leisure services. But the overwhelming benefit of doing this, Leader, is that we do free up that VAT. We do get additional income into our leisure centres, and we do have the measures in place to ensure that we monitor this. So if there's a risk here, it's very much a managed risk.
Okay, thanks. That seems pretty straightforward. Peter, is there anything you want to add to that? No? Okay, colleagues, anybody? Oh, Rich?
Just simply to say, I think this is a very welcome report, and I'm looking forward to bringing a wide-ranging report tomorrow to full council about Mon Life, including some of the investments we want to make in future in our leisure services, particularly in light of the climate change emergency, the increasing demands on our National Health Service, and the key objectives in line with our corporate plan that we want people in Monmouthshire to be able to enjoy a fitter and more active life.
Well, thanks, Rich. We look forward to a heavy day tomorrow. So I'm going to take us to the recommendations here. And in 2.1, to submit retrospective claims in respect of the Ealing VAT ruling. In 2.2, that the council's processes and systems are amended to allow Ealing ruling to be adopted from the 1st of November 2019. 2.3, that an appraisal of outsourcing the Caldecott leisure investment to a third party be undertaken. And 2.4, to continue to closely monitor VAT costs, especially costs spent in VAT-exempt areas, and where necessary to identify and advise on options using a look-forward approach, and that would mitigate any future likelihood of losses of irrecoverable VAT that might arise through the breach of the Council's partial exemption calculation and 5% threshold. All in favour of those? That's it. Great. Thank you very much. That brings us to the end of this meeting. I won't be looking to hold further cabinet meetings in this chamber unless we do believe that there is a lot of people needing to come and we need to accommodate. I don't feel it's conducive to the best way for cabinet to interface with each other and others. But thank you very much, everybody who contributed today. A challenging agenda which needed to be discussed. So can I thank everybody watching in at home as well and close the meeting. Thank you.